Amy Estes is a middle school English and drama teacher by day. However, her true loves in life are writing stories of all kinds and performing stand-up comedy. Amy has performed all over the country, including SF Sketchfest, the Women in Comedy Festival, and the Portland Queer Comedy Festival. Her writing has been featured on the Belladonna Comedy, Slackjaw Humor, and Soul Pancake. She also performs near nightly in Sacramento and San Francisco. And don't forget, she is a teacher. I saw her for the first time at her performance of Mortified, unbeknownst to her. Amy had been on our shortlist, and after that show, I knew she would deliver an amazing talk for you. Please welcome to the stage, Amy Estes.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I have a teacher comic voice, but I just want to make sure. I'm so excited to be here. Creative Mornings has been such a source of inspiration for me. When I get to attend as a teacher, it's a little tricky, but when I get to come, I always walk away with something that I've learned and something that's important to me. So it's just a huge honor to be here. I was thrilled when I found out that the theme this month was Muse. As a creative person, Muse is something that I've thought about for a long time and honestly have really waited for it to visit me in my life. I've grown up thinking for a long time that I wasn't that creative. I'm surrounded by friends that are digital artists and visual artists and photographers, and I'm the sort of person who only takes decent photos by the grace of the portrait mode on her iPhone, and my art tends to look like a child made it with its feet. And so I grew up thinking like I just wasn't that creative. I waited often for this version of the Muse to visit me. This is Botticelli's Muse, the traditional person who, we think of that visits us, that comes to us, that all of a sudden you have a flash of inspiration or something happens to you and you know it's your time to be creative. My journey looked significantly different than that. My Muse ended up being this. This is me. This is the summer between 8th and 9th grade. I really promise I tried to style my bangs. I'm growing out a mullet, so be gentle. I begged for those glasses because I thought I was very intelligent. And that is my father's polo shirt. It was the 90s. I thought it was really amazing. But what else was happening at this time in my life was that I was compulsively journaling. I've been a journaler since I was a child. As a little kid, I compulsively wrote stories. I truly believed that I could grow up and be a twin one day. I don't think I quite understood how it worked. So I have all of these, like this anthology of stories about this girl named Bonnie who was a twin, and this was like what I did with my free time. I wrote and kept this journal of just ridiculous things in my life. And this time in particular was an interesting one for me as a human being. I was a straight A student, first chair clarinet, no brag. President of the Christian club on my campus, and definitely a full-on dork in middle school that desperately wanted to be cool. And I captured my thoughts about that in this journal that was written with all of the passion and drama that only a middle schooler can bring to the table. But as I got older, it also became my number one party trick. When my friends and I were drinking, I would whip this journal out and we would laugh hysterically as I did things like had my first crushes, my first kiss, agonized over friends, and all of these really personal things, including some that like are so sexually graphic and humiliating that I would like die if anyone ever read them. You have no idea when you're writing in middle school, like this will become something that you use. And as I got older, a friend of mine who had heard me do this ridiculous thing where I'd read from this journal said, "Have you ever heard of Mortified?" And if you are not familiar with Mortified, it's a stage show that was started in LA and then now is performed all over the world. It's turned into a podcast and a TV show, but it's all comprised of material that people wrote before age 19. So it is in fact mortifying. It's aptly named. And she said, Amy, you have that journal. You should apply to do Mortified. They're doing it in San Francisco and Oakland. And as I looked into it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so funny. This is so fun. I could never do that, but it looks really cool. I sort of kept it in the back of my mind, and she would periodically ask me. And finally, I decided, you know what, I'm going to submit these extra ridiculous journal entries. And I did. I spent about 6 months, 8 months working on producing a piece for Mortified, all about having a crush on someone and having sort of a sexual awakening, but also trying to stay very committed to Jesus. If you ever get a chance to go watch Mortified, it's fully ridiculous. But in April of 2017, I performed at Mortified for the first time. And what I didn't know going to Mortified was that at every show, there are anywhere between 400 and 700 human beings. So I walked into this bar and performance space in San Francisco and went like, oh, okay. Like I had no idea what was ahead of me. My best friend was with me, and she texted me from the crowd and was like, are you going to be able to do this? Like, are you okay? And I was like, well, it's kind of too late. So I went out and I got on stage and I took a breath, and instead of being nervous, I was like, oh my God, like this, hello, like this is, I'm born to do this. And I had so much fun. And that alone was life-changing, that experience to get to share this very vulnerable part of myself on stage was life-changing. But actually what was more life-changing was that afterwards, the producer, as I was saying goodbye to him, said to me, hey, are you sure you've never done like stand-up comedy or any other sort of comedy thing? I think you'd be really good. And what he had no idea of knowing was that that had been my secret dream since I was a little kid. I loved comedy. I have a hysterical family. I firmly believe that my start was like around my kitchen table with my very hilarious parents and little brother. But what I'd grown up watching was Tina Fey and Amy Poehler and all these brilliant women starting to make their way into comedy. And I thought, I'm too old. I'm not funny enough. I'm just an English teacher. How could this be part of my life? That was the story I had had in my brain for years. But when someone else said to me, hey, you might think about this, I think you'd be good, driving home that night, I signed up for a stand-up comedy class at the Sacramento Comedy Spot and took a leap for the first time. To me, one of the first ideas that I had around Muse when I was putting together this talk was this idea of permission. Did I really need a man's permission? Not to like be like a man's permission, but did I need someone's permission to sign up to take a comedy class? 100% no. But that changed my whole life because it was something that someone else saw in me and said, hey, you should give this a try. And I felt free and able to tackle this thing that I'd held so deeply and secretly inside of me. The good news is that most creative people are starting to go for their dreams, but I would be willing to bet that every single one of us in here has that secret thing in the back of our head. That thing that we want to make, the work we're not sure about, that idea that keeps coming back and forth. You don't need anyone's permission, but if you don't believe me, this is your permission slip. Take this as your sign to do what it is that you want to do. I have a lot of feelings that I'll share next about when the Muse visits, but what we have to start with is this idea that our voice matters and the work that we make matters when we put it into the world, whether someone else gives us permission or not. The next thing that I want to talk about is priorities, and this is a painful one for me. As I've shared, I am a middle school teacher. I've been teaching for 14 years, and I spent 5 of those years teaching in a district that's very conservative right outside of Sacramento. And I started at that school and immediately became engulfed in everything that was going on there. I was in charge of a million things. I developed really strong connections with families and my colleagues. But during that time in my life, I was also navigating a massive personal change, and that was coming out as gay. Similarly to being a stand-up comic, but on a much deeper and more personal level, I had always known that I was queer, and I had resisted coming out for a number of reasons, including being raised in a very conservative town outside of Sacramento, and also having a close relationship with a very religious family. I didn't want to disappoint anyone, but as I went through that beautiful journey and challenge that really changed everything in my life, I was also teaching simultaneously. And as I came out to my family and to my friends and to my colleagues, the final frontier for me was coming out to my students. And it was something that I made a choice not to do for a long time. It felt reckless and dangerous, even though it's 2019. Now, it was 2017 then. It shouldn't have been a big deal. It felt like a big deal for me to be able to share this part of myself with my students. I didn't ever get the choice to make. The summer of 2017, I met the woman who is now my wife, and like every good millennial, I wanted to shout my love from the rooftops or post it on Instagram, which is what I did. I started sharing photos of this relationship evolving, and a former student of mine took those photos and turned them into the most disgusting and hateful memes I've ever seen about gay people. And I would love to say, hey, here's a happy ending to the story, everything turned out great. But unfortunately, my administration and the families and the communities where I was teaching chose not to support me. And the harassment and the stress of that situation grew. And I ended up taking a leave of absence and eventually leaving that job. I wound up in a much happier place. It's a happy ending. But all of a sudden, during that time when I wasn't teaching, my entire identity had been changed. My whole adult life, I had been Miss Estes, English teacher, and suddenly I was Amy Estes, what am I doing with my time? I had no idea. I felt directionless and lost, and what actually came in to fill that space was my creativity. Suddenly I had time to perform comedy. I started writing a lot more, and I firmly believe that creativity saved me in that time of my life, but moreover, it shifted my priorities forever. Because prior to that, I was approaching my life as a teacher who happened to be creative on the edges of her time, and now I approach my life as a creative person who happens to teach during the day. And it was a massive shift for me because, as Creative Mornings says, everyone is creative, but we're so quick to shove that side of ourselves out the window. It's the first thing to go. If we're working or we have children or we have other priorities, suddenly that creative part of ourselves is gone, and it's vital as creative people that we nurture it. I didn't realize how vital it was until I saw that I had let it go in favor of doing something else. And once I reintroduced it, everything in my life started to change. Not only did my life start to shift, but the level of creativity that I had seemed to escalate the more time that I put into it. Because suddenly I was creating this time and this energy around doing things that really fulfilled me creatively. And it's something I feel strongly about with Muse. There's this amazing quote by Stephen King that I'll read to you. And it says, "Don't wait for the muse. As I've said, he's a hard-headed guy who's not susceptible to a lot of creative fluttering. This isn't the Ouija board or the spirit world we're talking about here, but just another job like laying pipe or driving long-haul trucks. Your job is to make sure the muse knows where you're going to be every day from 9 till noon or 7 till 3. If he does know, I assure you that sooner or later he'll start showing up." I used to get really irritated when I would read writing books and it would be like, every day put your butt in the chair and write, because that's advice that we get so often. But like many pieces of advice that are repeated, I feel like they're right. I have written at least 750 words every single day for quite a while now, and it has shifted how my writing and how my comedy and how things evolve because I'm making time. I feel like it's changed my brain to know how to be creative, but it's also invited that muse to show up. The more ideas I put out into the world, the more ideas I have. And I feel like that's the beautiful part of Muse, is that when you start showing up and prioritizing your own creativity, the muse responds in kind. And whether you believe in the universe or a muse or nothing, I firmly believe that the world responds as well. As soon as I started saying yes to ideas and to different things that I could do, the world started responding with more and more opportunities for me to do those things that I loved. And I think it's a bold choice to prioritize yourself and your creativity. We're often told, like, no, all of these other things have to come first. But as creative people, that's the beautiful thing about what we bring to the world, right? That should be our priority. What can we create? What can we make? And it doesn't have to be visual art or writing or something else. It can be the way that you just live your life every single day, bringing it to the table. Last but not least is push. And I have a love-hate relationship with this idea of push. I think that we exist in a world that wants us to always go faster and more and better and harder. And while I claim to rail against that, anyone in my life will tell you that's exactly how I tend to function. But really, I think it's less about pushing super hard and more about getting out of your own way. I do a lot of stand-up comedy, and it's been so much fun, and I've only been in it for a few years. And one of the things that I've heard over and over and over again is, until you've been doing this X number of years, you have no business doing this. You haven't been doing it long enough, so you shouldn't apply to this festival. You haven't had this experience, so don't bother sending your tape in for this show. And I think that form of gatekeeping exists in so many areas of creativity. Until I've done this, it doesn't matter. Until I've made X number of dollars, I'm not an artist. And the thing is that everyone is creative, and wherever you're at, get out of your own way. During my first year of comedy, I decided to, on a whim, submit an application for a festival called the Women in Comedy Festival in Boston, Massachusetts. Sponsored by HBO, someone sent it to me, and I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm never gonna get in, and it doesn't matter. Like, I'm not good enough, I haven't been doing this long enough. I completely forgot that I applied. And then 4 months later, I got an email saying, hey, thanks so much for applying. We'd love for you to come. And I was like, oh crap. Am I ready for this? And I didn't think that I was, but when I showed up there, as nervous as I was and as anxious as I was given the most incredible opportunities. I made friends with comedians, I made connections, I opened for people who were really doing big things in comedy, and that weekend really changed the course of my comedy career in terms of the people that I met and what I've been able to do since then. And I think about how often we just say no to things, we count ourselves out before we've given ourselves a chance to shine. And so I would say, get out of your own way. That push or that moving might look like submitting a piece of art to a show or sending in a piece of writing for publication, but taking those small steps to move yourself and your career forward. There's a quote by Mindy Kaling that I absolutely love, and it does have a swear in it. I've done very well not cussing this whole time as a comic. I'm very proud of myself. But in that quote, she says, "Why the fuck not me should be your motto all the time." And not to discount anyone's work or make anyone, sound above anyone else, but there are people who have less qualifications and less experience and less whatever it is that you need, doing the jobs that you want to occupy, doing the things that you want to do. And the difference usually between people who move forward and not is that they put themselves out there. Don't ask, don't get. Don't put yourself out there, don't get what you want. And I would encourage you to put yourself out there. You have permission. Make yourself a priority and then push yourself. And if you're not ready to push hard and set goals and go aggressively, at least get out of the way. Say yes. Do the things you're invited to do. And I promise you that the Muse will start showing up in spades because they see that you're taking yourself seriously. As creative people, I so often hear things about self-care and how we can prioritize ourselves and all of these things. And I would say that I've tried them all. I love a pedicure. I love yoga. I love it all. I'm a Taurus. I love to pamper, okay? I'm into the self-care. However, the best form of self-care that I've ever found is taking yourself seriously. Working towards the things that you want to do. Believing that you matter. Believing that the work you put into the world is important, believing in your own voice. So while there may not be some magical fairy godmother in here to sprinkle the fairy dust on all of us and we walk out just in touch with the Muse, I hope that you walk out knowing that you matter, that what you have to share in the world is important, and that the Muse will show up as soon as you show up to yourself. Thank you guys so much. You can find me here